Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are the FAIRtax
Guys.
Guys, and we are still on vacation this week. And if you missed last week's episode, it was a replay of one of our favorite ones, the Thomas Jefferson skit based on the article that Steve Hayes and Charles Adams wrote. And we wrote a part 2 for this thing.
Yep, that's right.
So that's what we're going to hear today on FAIRtax Power Radio. But first, let's give us your email address, our email address, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. Invite you to like us on our Facebook page, The FAIRtax Guys on Facebook. Check us out. Leave us a comment. We will respond to you for sure on things like that. We certainly appreciate all the interaction we've gotten all this year through our email account and through our Facebook page in response to FAIRtax Power Radio. Advise you or encourage you to share the podcast here with your family and friends. Let folks know about it, because the more folks that know about the FAIRtax, the quicker the income tax is going down the toilet.
Yeah, that's right. And that is our goal, to get rid of the income tax. I mean, if you listen to last week's skit, Thomas Jefferson, President Jefferson, was not too happy when he came back over 200 years later to find out what had happened to this country because of the income tax and because of the abusiveness of the IRS.
Yeah, I think he would be absolutely, told us last week, he would be horrified at what the IRS has turned into. Total disregard for all of the constitutional principles that he was instrumental in creating.
That's
the
right.
presumption of innocence, the protection from an unreasonable search and seizure. Every constitutional principle in the book is violated on a routine basis by the Internal Revenue Service, and they get away with it.
And they do that because Congress has allowed them to. I believe they gave them the ability to ignore the Bill of Rights so they could fight crime. But as we pointed out in previous FAIRtax Power Radios, the IRS finds almost glee in going after completely innocent citizens. We've talked about civil asset forfeiture. We're not going to get into that any more deeply. But like Bob says, when it comes to the IRS, forget presumption of innocence. Forget due process, and forget the idea that you're protected against unreasonable search and seizure. Those are apparently ancient concepts with the IRS, and it's because Congress allows them to do it. We can't tolerate this anymore, and that's why we keep putting out these episodes of FAIRtax Power Radio, all right, to keep you informed and to help and to try to enlist your help in getting this done.
Okay, well, today's episode of FAIRtax Power Radio is the rest of the story, so to speak, on the Thomas Jefferson thing. I believe that should he come back and the fair tax is the law of the land.
That's right.
I think he'd be quite happy with the result of what that would be. So we kind of pull this out of the air and put this together as to what it would look like, what Thomas Jefferson would think of the fair tax.
Yeah, it's exactly 5 years to the day after the first Thomas Jefferson visit. And George Morgan is at his table, and listen to the story, and you'll see the rest of it. But Bob is right. At this point in the story, the fair tax is the law of the land, and things are a little different when Jefferson comes back this time.
All right, let's check it out. Our story begins on the rather stormy evening of April 13th, 2020. Presented for your perusal, George Morgan, at his dining room table poring over various forms and pamphlets. Unexpectedly, there's a knock at the door.
Who could that be? I'm not expecting anyone, and I need to get this work done before Emily comes back from shopping.
George pushes away from the table and walks to the door. As he's walking, he remembers a visit he had 5 years ago, a visit that now seems like a dream. Standing right there is that vision from the past. The same long red hair, the same 18th century clothing, the same man that visited him 5 years ago in 2015. George was more surprised this time than at the previous visit.
I can't believe this. Is it really you? Is Thomas Jefferson visiting me again?
Hello, George. May I come in?
George stands there in stunned silence with a million thoughts running through his head. Finally, he responds.
Yes, of course. Come in. I can't believe this is happening again. I have so much to tell you.
That was my concern. When I visited 5 years ago, I was dismayed at what had happened. The republic that my compatriots and I worked so hard to bring about, that so many brave souls fought and died for, was in jeopardy. What you described to me shook me to the core. It seemed that our republic, our grand experiment, was doomed.
Well, Mr. Jefferson, you'll be glad to know that our republic is doing just fine now. There have been some amazing changes since the last time you knocked on that door. Changes I think you'll approve of.
Changes? What sort of changes? And how can you say that our republic is doing just fine, to use your words, when only 5 years ago you were in a prison of laws implemented by a distant ruling class? Have you given up completely?
George was feeling much more comfortable with his guest this time around and was undeniably pleased at what he had to tell him.
No. In fact, things are turning around quite nicely. Let me explain. When you were here before, I started thinking about what you said. I realized you were right about us being in prison. I remembered that you wrote in the Declaration of Independence about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was clear we had strayed very far from the intent of your words, and I was determined to do something about it. Then I remembered hearing about this group of people who were talking about
revolution. You staged a revolution? I remember what I wrote to William Smith in 1787. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is a natural manure. I'm not surprised that a revolution was needed.
No, Mr. Jefferson. We did not have to fight another revolution, although I guess you could think of what happened as a revolution of sorts.
Please, out with it, man. Tell me what happened.
For a moment, George looked down at the floor, clearly embarrassed and very serious.
I don't mind telling you that after your last visit, I was feeling pretty low. You were right. We were living in a prison of our own making. But I decided that I had to do something about it. When I learned about the FAIRtax and read the information on their website... Well, that's going to take some explaining, but let's just say I found a place where I could learn about the FAIRtax and talk to others about it. I also read a book about it, and then I noticed in the newspaper they were having meetings right here in town.
George invited Mr. Jefferson to sit down in the living room where they could carry on their conversation in a more comfortable setting.
Well, just what is this FAIRtax? I don't see how any income tax can be considered fair. In fact, the Constitution forbade an income tax, but apparently you people ignored it. And, if I remember correctly from my last visit, you actually amended the Constitution to allow Congress to impose an income tax. How could you do that?
Mr. Jefferson, please remember the 16th Amendment was over 100 years ago. My generation didn't do it. But when I learned how much damage it was doing to our country, I was determined to do something about it. I decided that helping with the FAIRtax was the best thing for me to do.
Again, what is this FAIRtax?
Okay, the FAIRtax is a consumption tax. It replaced the income tax. The federal income tax is completely gone, and we repealed the 16th Amendment so Congress can never tax our income again.
Mr. Jefferson's demeanor visibly changed. He was now very interested in hearing more about this FAIRtax.
You repealed the income tax amendment. Well, that must have been very difficult. We purposely wrote the Constitution so that changing it was not easy. How did you accomplish that?
Well, the IRS made it easy. You remember what I told you about the IRS 5 years ago?
Yes, I do. And according to what you told me, it was bureaucracy that routinely violated the Bill of Rights.
Well, the IRS got completely out of control and was actually ruining people's lives. They were corrupt and incompetent. It got so bad that the people insisted Congress do something about it. And they did. They impeached the IRS commissioner.
George, impeaching a bureaucrat is hardly a revolution.
No, that was only the beginning. Maybe Congress thought that would shut us up, but instead it gave us hope. Hope that we could actually make a real change. Hope that Congress would actually listen to the people.
Well, I would hope so. After all, we did create a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, did we not?
Indeed, you did. And millions of Americans realized how important our founding documents are, both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. By the way, according to the history books, you wrote the Declaration almost single-handedly. Thank you for that. But back to what I was saying. We realized that allowing Congress to tax our income was a huge mistake.
Tax your income. They were taxing your hard work, your efforts to support your families. They were taxing the very thing that makes a society successful. But you said that now you have a consumption tax. How do you collect this consumption tax? How do you tax what you consume?
George delved into the details of the fair tax, that it was collected only on the final retail sale to the consumer, and it eliminated all taxes on income for both individuals and businesses. He explained that it is simply a sales tax, collected on the sale of services and new products, not used products. He further explained that the retailers collect the tax and send it to the state sales tax authority, who in turn send it on to the federal treasury. And since most of the states already had a sales tax, the infrastructure to collect the fair tax was already in place.
Now that we have the fair tax, I never need to worry about doing an income tax return, sending all that information to the IRS. In fact, the IRS will be completely shut down by the end of the year. And right now, it's only allowed to work on income taxes that were owed up to the time that the fair tax went into effect on January 1st of 2018. We just aren't bothered by them anymore. And that's a pretty good feeling.
George, I'm so pleased that your fellow citizens saw fit to rid themselves of the income tax. Amending the Constitution to allow an income tax was a gargantuan mistake, which, from what you've told me, required more than 100 years to correct. But you say now this sales tax, what you call the fair tax, is collected by the merchants and sent to the state taxing authority and then on to the federal treasury? How is this accomplished? By the way, how many states are in the country at this time?
Well, Mr. Jefferson, I believe that during your time, we had about 20 states.
25, actually.
Oh, okay, 25. You'll be pleased to know that we now have 50 states. The contiguous 48 states are bordered by the Atlantic, the Pacific, Canada, and Mexico. And then we have Alaska and Hawaii. By the way, your Louisiana purchase was a great idea.
50 states. This is wonderful. But that must be many millions of people. Again, how do you collect this fair tax from so many people? Also, where is YE?
Yeah, it is a lot of people. I think we have about 320 million right now. But don't worry, keeping track of the sales tax is easy. It's done by computers.
Computers. Oh, yes, those calculating machines you told me about 5 years ago. I remember.
Yep. We now have whole networks of these machines that talk to each other and work together. Keeping track of taxes collected is just one of the many things these machines do for us. These computers are programmed, or they are instructed by people to collect these numbers and send them to the right places.
But if these computers collect all your information, that sounds as bad as the IRS thing you told me about.
Yeah, no. That's actually the beauty of this system. The computers only collect numbers. They don't collect any personal information about anyone. Each sale is anonymous. No one cares who's paying the tax as long as it's paid. Pretty great, huh?
Okay, if you say so. But it is still rather hard for me to imagine how these computers work.
Well, truth be told, a lot of people these days know how to use a computer, but very few really know how they actually work. The important thing is they do work, and they make our lives a lot easier. One of the things they do really well is keep track of numbers for things like collecting this fair tax.
Well, it sounds like something we could have used back in 1789.
Mr. Jefferson, our conversation has made me realize that we have a great many tools and capabilities that just didn't exist in your time. People have been busy inventing things ever since you signed the Declaration. That part about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, people have been pursuing a lot more than happiness. They've been pursuing all kinds of inventions. As I talk to you, I realize that many things that we take for granted now were only dreams in your time?
Mr. Jefferson is lost in thought for a moment.
The pursuit of happiness. You know, some of my compatriots wanted to phrase that as the pursuit of property, but the idea was much bigger than property and belongings. It was the pursuit of dreams, of new theories, new ways to bring in goods to market.
It's a pursuit of new ideas. Americans have been free to think big, to try new things, to take risks. Sometimes we fail, but continue to pursue what you called happiness. And ever since we passed the fair tax, there's been a lot of pursuing going on. The economy's booming. There's a new industrial park that's going to be built across town.
Industrial park?
Yes, sir. It will contain new factories, big buildings where people make things. More people will have jobs and be able to provide for their families. And those families will spend more money, which helps other businesses grow. More business and more consumption.
One thing puzzles me, George. When you asked me, and I noticed that your table was covered with forms and papers. If this fair tax is so simple, why do you need to fill out all these forms?
Oh, those aren't tax forms. Those are vacation brochures and travel pamphlets. We found that we have more disposable cash, and Emily and I want to travel someplace we haven't been before.
Well, I can tell you I loved my time in France and other parts of Europe.
Well, that's a possibility. The thing is, it's not just my wife and me. Americans are generally doing much better these last few years. Many American companies have moved overseas to escape the old tax system. They've come back to America. Many companies previously based in foreign countries have come here. More new houses are being built. Cities and towns are growing. New roads are being built. More business means more travel and more jobs.
George was extremely proud to report to Mr. Jefferson all of this wonderful progress.
Well, this all sounds too good to be true. And what of Congress? Are they trying to complicate this new tax code? By the way, with this large population that you told me about, there must be hundreds and hundreds of congressmen by now.
We have 435 congressmen and women in the House, and of course, 100 senators. Yes, it's a large legislative body. But here's the beauty of the fair tax. It's so simple, the only thing Congress can do is change the rate. With the old tax code, Congress was messing around with it all the time. They'd use the tax code to pit one group against another. They'd use the IRS to harass their political enemies. But all that's changed now.
Men and women in Congress. Now, that is interesting.
Yes, women got the right to vote with the 19th Amendment in 1919. And they've been getting elected to the House and the Senate for some time now.
Did you mean to say that Congress is not making changes to this fair tax as they did with the income tax?
That's right. That's right. As I said, the only thing Congress can do is change the rate of the sales tax. But if they do, they change it for everybody. They cannot play games with us anymore.
George, it sounds like you have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people once again.
George was really hitting his stride now.
Well, I think we're a lot closer to it than we were before. Since Congress doesn't spend any time making the tax code more complicated, they can now spend their time making things better for everyone. People have been pretty upset with the waste and fraud that exists in the federal government. And people have been letting them know about it, too. A lot of congressmen and women who were there for many years have been losing elections. We have a number of new people in Congress that actually listen to the people.
Well, when we wrote the Constitution, we assumed that the people would be keeping a close eye on the government and not let it get too big or too powerful. I'm glad to see things are beginning to swing back in that direction.
I wish I could take you to Congress so you could tell them yourself.
George, I must take my leave of you soon, but I am so grateful for the time that you have given me. I'm heartened by what you've been telling me about our country. It seems that people have changed the horrible course that the country was on 5 years ago when I last visited. As I said in a letter to Francis Gray in 1815, although a Republican government is slow to move, yet once in motion, its momentum becomes irresistible. As with a great ship, the people have changed its course away from the shoals of tyranny. You have escaped the prison of the income tax. I don't need to talk to your Congress. The people need to continue talking to Congress. Stay engaged. It is the truest method to keep your representatives honest. Never let them feel complacent. The people must be ever vigilant to ensure your government works for you. However, I am confident that liberty is on the rise in these United States of America. I only have one question, George.
What is that, Mr. Jefferson?
Just where is Hawaii?
George and Mr. Jefferson continued talking at length. Both men were confident now that our republic was more secure than it was 5 years ago when Mr. Jefferson first visited. Mr. Jefferson warned George, though, to keep engaged with his legislators and to encourage all he knew to do the same. As Mr. Jefferson took his leave, George was feeling very proud of what he was able to report to President Jefferson, very proud of his country, and very confident that the United States of America once again was on the right course. Don't you just love a happy ending?
Yes, especially that happy ending.
Oh, it will be a glorious day in the USA when we get rid of the income tax and replace it with a fair tax. And I do believe Thomas Jefferson would approve.
And we will see that sometime in the future. Now, at this point, as we're recording this, Congress and the president are working on their tax reform. They call it reform. We don't really call it, it's not true reform, but anyways, they will probably come up with something and the president will sign it and they'll have some kind of tax reform, quote unquote.
Yeah, but we're kind of projecting into the future here. We're recording this a couple of weeks before they're actually going to be released out on Spreaker, but we're thinking that by the time this episode airs, there's a good chance that some kind of tax reform will have been signed into law, or at least what they call tax reform. And as we mentioned on our Facebook Live a couple of weeks ago and continue to do so here on FAIRtax Power Radio, what they are giving you is not true tax reform. You still have an income tax, you still have the IRS, you still have withholding, you still have tax returns, you still have the evasion problem, you still have all the things that are wrong with the income tax before tax reform are still wrong with the income tax now. And we will not give up the fight to replace the income tax. Now, our Congress critters are going to be entrenched now. Oh, we've done tax reform. We're going to move on to something else now. We have got to stay on them to get rid of the income tax and replace it with a fair tax.
And you can help us do this. Let's keep track. All right, so they've got this big tax reform package, and everything is done, right? No, of course not. You go to congress.gov, and in the search bar, you type in quotes, Internal Revenue Code, all right? And that's because most of the proposals to change the tax code start with the phrase, to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. So you have to put it in quotes so it searches for that string. And in the first 12 months of this Congress, over 1,100 proposals. Now, why does anybody think they're going to stop putting those proposals? Just because they've got this tax reform and the president has signed it, that's just, they're going to continue to change it.
It's funny, while they were considering that tax reform, there were still proposals being made.
Yeah.
Which means there are still lobbyists slipping Congress critters campaign cash to make, to buy themselves favorable tax treatment. And that will continue as long as we have an income tax and as long as people aren't paying attention. That's why we need to get rid of that entire system and to replace it with a fair tax.
Yeah, as long as that instability is there, as long as Congress is constantly tinkering with the tax code, businesses are going to have a heck of a time trying to keep up with it. Yeah. Businesses don't like uncertainty. It's very difficult for them to plan for the future. How can they plan to expand or change their business, modify it, keep up with the times if they don't know what the tax code is going to look like tomorrow, next week, or next month? Yeah. Because Congress is constantly changing it.
Yeah, but you got to realize that when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Constitution, getting back to Jefferson here, he knew, and the folks around him knew, what an awful thing an income tax was. So as originally written, an income tax was unconstitutional, and that was taken to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled such, in the late 1800s. They said, nope, can't do that. An income tax is unconstitutional. It required an amendment to the Constitution, the 16th Amendment, the worst mistake they ever made, to allow the federal government to impose an income tax, and we've got to get rid of that thing. But Jefferson did not like income taxes, and there was a reason why it was unconstitutional to begin with right out of the box.
Yeah, just a little correction there, Bob. Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. Madison wrote the Constitution.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah, but
sorry about
anyways,
that.
but the concepts are the same. Our founding fathers would be appalled at what we have facing us right now. We have gotten used to it because little by little, drip by drip, the federal government has insinuated itself into every aspect of our lives. The founding fathers would be horrified at what they see now. And that is the purpose of our 2 Jefferson skits, to show you what Jefferson would probably think about the situation now, and the sequel to it, how it's going to be helped with the fair tax. The fair tax holds a lot of hope for the future. It will hold Congress in check. It'll give us a much more sane and fair tax system, unlike what we have now. So we need your help to get this done. We can't get this done just by talking into the microphones like we're doing.
We're going to keep trying it.
Yeah, you gotta join us here, folks. So let's see, how can they help?
Well, I would suggest that first order of business would be go to fairtax.org. And really, if you've been listening to FairTax Power Radio, you've got the gist of what the fair tax is all about. It's a simple, anonymous tax. It's a consumption tax. It's added into and included into the price of everything you buy, just like the taxes on gasoline. So it's not going to turn a $100 item on the shelf into a $123 item at the cash register.
Right.
It's included in there. You pay it anonymously. It's very, very difficult to evade.
That's right.
It takes 2 people to evade a consumption tax, both the cheater and then the retailer that they're getting something from. And so the income tax has just got to go away. The evasion's going to kill it. But we do need to make sure that if you go to fairtax.org, read the FAQs there. There's a lot of good information on what the fair tax is, how it works, how you're going to get a tax refund every month. We call that the prebate. And how you're going to, withholding's going to go away. You'll bring home the full gross amount of your paycheck. There is just so much to like about the fair tax. But go to fairtax.org first and really learn about it. Then you jump on to bigsolution.org, and that's where you get on the bandwagon here and jump on the team and help us get this thing done.
And I'll tell you another source. If you're looking for ways of introducing the fair tax to your friends, the fair tax National Organization, Americans for Fair Taxation, has a YouTube page, and there are dozens of little videos. Each one is like 1 to 3 minutes long, and they take a particular concept and they explain how the fair tax will accomplish that, or the advantages of the fair tax. It's a great source of introducing the fair tax. And if somebody has a question like, well, how is it going to be collected? Is the IRS going to be needed? How is it going to affect seniors? Just dozens of questions. And they have the video answer to it. Great resource right there.
All right, time's flying here. We wanted to thank some folks here at the end of the year who have helped with the fair tax. You've got a whole list of them. Go.
Well, we want to thank Jade Wally for his contributions to FairTax Power Radio. They've been great. We've had some great episodes. Steve Hayes for his contributions, writing the first Jefferson skit. Randy Fisher for providing it with, when we get stuck, because we're not tax experts, Randy and Steve can help us out, and Jade has turned into a pretty good authority on the fair tax too. So, and there are a lot of others. All the volunteers here in Florida, we're blessed with some great volunteers, and I'm sure, and I know they are around the country too. So all of the volunteers who are volunteers, there's no paid situation here. So thanks very much.
Yes, and to everybody who listens to FairTax Power Radio and shares it with their family and friends. And that's going to wrap it up. Merry Christmas again for everybody from the FairTax Guys. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
The FairTax Guys again reminding you that the fair tax is America's big solution. And once you understand it,
you will demand it. Thank you.
Fair tax is coming. Don't stand in the way. Fair tax is coming. Cause the